Full in the center of the town there stood, thick set with trees, a venerable wood. The Tyrians landing near this holy ground, and digging here a prosperous omen found. From under earth a course's head they drew, their growth and future fortune to pursue. This fated sign their founders Juno gave, of a soil fruitful and a people brave. Sidonian Dido here with solemn state did Juno's temple build and consecrate, enriched with gifts and with a golden shrine, but more the goddess made the place divine. On brazen steps the marble threshold rose, and brazen plates the cedar beams enclose. The rafters are with brazen coverings crowned, the lofty doors on brazen hinges sound. What first Æneas this place beheld, revived his courage and his fear expelled. For while expecting there the queen he raised his wondering eyes and round the temple gazed, admired the fortune of the rising town, the striving artists and their arts renown. He saw in order painted on the wall whatever did unhappy Troy befall. The wars that fame around the world had blown, all to the life and every leader known. There Agamemnon, Priam here he spies, and fierce Achilles, who both king defies. He stopped and weeping said, O friend, even here the monuments of Trojan wars appear. Unknown disasters fill even foreign lands. See there, where old unhappy Priam stands. Even the mute walls relate the warrior's fame, and Trojan griefs the Tyrians' pity claim. He sat, his tears a ready passage find, devouring what he saw so well designed, and with an empty picture fed his mind, for there he saw the fainting Grecians yield, and here the trembling Trojans quit the field, pursued by fierce Achilles through the plain, on his high chariot driving over the slain. The tents of Rhesus next his grief renew, by their white sails betrayed to nightly view, and wakeful Diomede, whose cruel sword the sentry slew, nor spared their slumbering lord. Then took the fiery steeds o'er yet the food of Troy they taste, or lest the Santian flood. Elsewhere he saw where Troilus defied Achilles, and unequal combat tried. Then where the boy disarmed with loosened reins was by his horse hurried over the plains, hung by the neck and hair and dragged around, the hostile spear yet sticking in his wound. With tracks of blood inscribed the dusty ground. Meantime, the Trojan dames oppressed with woe, to Pallas fain in long procession go, in hopes to reconcile their heavenly foe. They weep, they beat their breasts, they rend their hair, and rich embroidered vests for presents bear. But the stern goddess stands unmoved with prayer. Thrice round the Trojan walls Achilles drew the corpse of Hector, whom in fight he slew. Here prime Zeus, and there for sums of gold the lifeless body of his son is sold. So said an object, and so well expressed, drew sighs and groans from the grieved hero's breast. To see the figure of his lifeless friend, and his old sire his helpless hand extend. Himself he saw amidst the Grecian train, mixed in the bloody battle on the plain, and swarthy Memnon in his arms he knew, his pompous ensigns and his Indian crew. Penthesilea there with haughty grace leads to the wars an Amazonian race. In their right hands a pointed dart they wield, the left for war sustains the lunar shield. Athwart her breast a golden belt she throws, amidst the press alone provokes 1,000 foes, and dares her maiden arms to manly force oppose. Thus, while the Trojan prince employs his eyes, fixed on the walls with wonder and surprise, the beauteous Dido with a numerous train, and pomp of gods ascends the sacred fane. Such on Eurota's banks or Cynthus' height, Diana seems, and so she charms the sight. When in the dance the grateful goddess lets the choir of nymphs and overtops their heads. Known by her quiver and her lofty mien, she walks majestic and she looks their queen. Latona sees her shine above the rest, and feeds with secret joy her silent breast. Such Dido was, with such becoming state, amidst the crowd she walks serenely great. Their labor to a future sway she speaks, and passing with a gracious glance proceeds. Then mounts the throne high placed before the shrine. In crowds around the swarming people join. She takes petitions and dispenses laws, hears and determines every private cause. Their tasks in equal portions she divides, and where unequal there by lots decides. Another way by chance Æneas bends his eyes, and unexpected sees his friends. And Theus, Sergestus grave, Cloanthus strong, and at their backs a mighty Trojan throng, whom late the tempest on the billows tossed, and widely scattered on another coast. The prince, unseen, surprised with wonder stands, and longs with joyful haste to join their hands. But doubtful of the wished event he stays, and from the hollow cloud his friends surveys, impatiently, till they told their present state, and where they left their ships, and what their fate, and why they came, and what was their request. For these were sent, commissioned by the rest, to sue for leave to land their sickly men, and gain admission to the gracious queen. Entering, with cries they filled the holy fane. Then thus, with lowly voice, Æneas began. O Queen, indulged by favor of the gods, to found an empire in these new abodes, to build a town with statues to restrain the wild inhabitants beneath thy reign. We wretched Trojans tossed on every shore, from sea to sea thy clemency implore. Forbid the fires our shipping to deface, receive the unhappy fugitives to grace, and spare the remnant of a pious race. We come not with design of wasteful prey, to drive the country, force the swains away, nor such our strength, nor such is our desire. The vanquished dare not to such thoughts aspire. A land there is, Hesperia named of old. The soil is fruitful and the men are bold. The Oenotrians held it once by common fame, now called Italia from the leader's name. To that sweet region was our voyage bent, when winds and every warring element disturbed our course, and far from sight of land, cast our torn vessels on the moving sand. The sea came on the south with mighty roar, dispersed and dashed the rest upon the rocky shore. Those few, you see, escaped the storm and fear, unless you interpose a shipwreck here. What men, what monsters, what inhuman race, what laws, what barbarous customs of the place, shut up a desert shore to drowning men, and drive us to the cruel seas again. If our hard fortune no compassion draws, nor hospitable rights, nor human laws, the gods are just and will revenge our cause. Æneas was our prince, a juster lord, our noble warrior never drew a sword, observant of the right religious of his word. If yet he lives and draws this vital air, nor we, his friends, of safety shall despair. Nor you, great queen, these offices repent, when he will equal, and perhaps augment. We want not cities, nor Sicilian coasts, where King Acestus Trojan lineage boasts. Permit our ships a shelter on your shores, refitted from your woods with planks and oars, that, if our prince be safe, we may renew our destined course and Italy pursue. But if, O best of men, the fates ordain that thou art swallowed in the Libyan main, and if our young Iolos be no more, dismiss our navy from your friendly shore, that we to good Acestus may return, and with our friends our common losses mourn. Thus spoke Æneas, the Trojan crew, with cries and clamors his request renew. The modest queen awhile, with downcast eyes, pondered the speech, then briefly thus replies: Trojans, dismiss your fears, my cruel fate, and doubts attending an unsettled state, force me to guard my coast from foreign foes, who has not heard the story of your woes. The name of fortune of your native place, the fame and valor of the Phrygian race. We Tyrians are not so devoid of sense, nor so remote from Phoebus' influence. Whether to Latian shores your course is bent, or driven by tempest from your first intent, you seek the good Acestus government. Your men shall be received, your fleet repaired, and sail with ships of convoy for your guard. Or would you stay and join your friendly prowess, to race and to defend the Tyrian towers? My wealth, my city, and myself are yours, and would to heaven the storm you felt would bring on Carthaginian coasts your wandering king, My people shall by my command explore the ports and creeks of every winding shore, and towns and wilds and shady woods in quest of so renowned and so desired a guest. Raised in his mind the Trojan hero stood, and longed to break out from his ambient cloud. Acastus found it, and thus urged his way. From whence, O God, is born this long delay? What more can you desire, your welcome sure, your fleet in safety and your friends secure? One only wants, and him we saw in vain, opposed the storm and swallowed in the main. Orontes in his fate or forfeit paid, the rest agrees with what your mother said. Scarce had he spoken, when the cloud gave way, the mists flew upward and dissolved in day. The Trojan chief appeared in open sight, august in visage and serenely bright. His mother goddess with hands divine had formed his curling locks and made his temples shine, and given his rolling eyes a sparkling grace, and breathed a youthful vigor on his face, like polished ivory, beauteous to behold, or Parian marble when enchased in gold. Thus radiant from the circling cloud he broke, and thus with manly modesty he spoke. He whom you seek am I, by tempest tossed, and saved from shipwreck on your Libyan coast. Presenting, gracious queen, before your throne, a prince that owes his life to you alone. Fair majesty, the refuge and redress of those whom fate pursues and warns oppress. You with pious offices employ to save the relics of abandoned Troy. Receive the shipwrecked on your friendly shore, with hospitable rites relieve the poor. Associate in your town a wandering train, and strangers in your palace entertain. What thanks can wretched fugitives return, who scattered through the world in exile mourn? The gods, if gods to goodness are inclined, if acts of mercy touch their heavenly mind, and more than all the gods, your generous heart, conscious of worth, requite its own desert. In you this age is happy, and this earth, and parents more than mortal gave you birth. While rolling rivers into sea shall run, and round the space of heaven the radiant sun, while threes the mountain tops with shades supply, your honor, name, and praise shall never die. Whatever abode my fortune has assigned, your image shall be present in my mind. Thus, having said, he turned with pious haste, and joyful his expecting friends embraced. With his right hand Ilioneus was graced, Serestus with his left, then to his breast Cloanthus and the noble Gaius pressed, and so by turns descended to the rest. The Tyrian queen stood fixed upon his face, pleased with his motions, ravished with his grace, admired his fortunes, more admired the man, then recollected stood, and thus began. What fate, O goddess born, what angry powers have cast you shipwrecked on our barren shores? And you, the great Æneas known to fame, who from celestial seed your lineage claim. The same Æneas whom fair Venus bore to famed Anchises on the Æneid shore. It calls into my mind through then a child, when Teucer came from Salamis exiled, and sought my father's aid to be restored. My father Belus then with fire and sword invaded Cyprus, made the region bare, and conquering finished the successful war. From him the Trojan siege I understood, the Grecian chiefs and your illustrious blood. Your foe himself the Dordan valor praised, and his own ancestry from Trojans raised. Enter, my noble guest, and you shall find, if not a costly welcome, yet a kind. For I myself like you have been distressed, till heaven afforded me this place of rest. Like you, an alien in a land unknown, I learned to pity woes so like my own. She sat, and to the palace led her guest, then offered incense and proclaimed a feast. Nor yet less careful for absent friends, twice 10 fat oxen to the ships she sends, besides 100 boars, 100 lambs, with bleeding cries attend their milky dams, and jars of generous wine and spacious bowls she gives to cheer the sailors' drooping souls. Now purple hangings cloth the palace walls, and sumptuous feasts are made in splendid halls. On Tyrian corpus richly wrought they dine, with loads of massy plate the sideboards shine, and antique vases all of gold embossed, the gold itself inferior to the cost. Of curious works where on the sides were seen the fights and figures of illustrious men, from their first founder to the present queen. The good Æneas' paternal care Iülus' absence could no longer bear, dispatched Achates to the ships in haste to give a glad relation of the past, and fraught with precious gifts to bring the boy, snatched from the ruins of unhappy Troy. A robe of tissue stiff with golden wire, and upper vest once Helen's rich attire, from Orcus by the famed adulteress brought, with golden flowers and winding foliage wrought. Her mother Leda present when she came to ruin Troy and set the world on flame. The scepter Priam's eldest daughter bore, her orient necklace and the crown she wore, of double texture glorious to behold, one order set with gems and one with gold. Instructed thus, the wise Achates goes, and in his diligence his duty shows. But Venus, anxious for her son's affairs, now counsel tries and new designs prepares, that Cupid should assume the shape and face of sweet Æneas, and the sprinkly grace should bring the presence in her nephew's stead, and in Elisa's veins the gentle poison shed. For much she feared the Tyrians, double-tongued, and knew the town to Juno's care belonged. These thoughts by night her golden slumbers broke, and thus alarmed to wing the love she spoke. My son, my strength, whose mighty power alone controls the thunderer on his awful throne, to thee thy much afflicted mother flies, and on thy succor and thy faith relies. Thou knowest, my son, how Jove's revengeful wife by force and fraud attempts thy brother's life, and often hast thou mourned with me his pains. Him Dido now with blandishment retains. But I suspect the town where Juno reigns. For this 'tis needful to prevent her lord, and fire with love the proud Phoenicians' horde. A love so violent, so strong, so sure, as neither age can change nor art can cure. How this may be performed, now take my mind, as Æneas by his father is designed, to come with presents laden from the port, to gratify the queen and gain the court. I mean to plunge the boy in pleasing sleep, and, ravished in Endalian bowers, to keep, or high Cythera, that the sweet deceit may pass unseen and unprevented the cheat. Take thou his form and shape, I beg the grace, but only for a night's revolving space. Thyself a boy, assume a boy's dissembled face, that when, amidst the fervor of the feast, the Tyrian hugs and fonds thee on her breast, and with sweet kisses in her arms constrains, thou mayst infuse thy venom in her veins. The god of love obeys and sets aside his bow and quiver and his plumy pride. He walks Iolus in his mother's sight, and in the sweet resemblance takes delight. The goddess then to young as Æneas flies, and in a pleasing slumber seals his eyes. Lulled in her lap amidst the train of lovers, she gently bears him to her blissful groves. Then with a wreath of myrtle crowns his head, and softly lays him on a flowery bed. Cupid meantime assumed his form and face, following Æneas with a shorter pace, and brought the gifts the queen already sate, amidst the Trojan lords in shining state. High on a golden bed her princely guest was next her side, in order sate the rest. Then canisters with bread or heaped on high, the attendants water for their hands supply, and having washed with silken towels dry. Next 50 handmaids in long order bore the censers, and with fumes the gods adore. Then youths and virgins twice as many joined to place the dishes and to serve the wine. The Tyrian train, admitted to the feast, approached and on the painted couches rest. All on the Trojan gifts with wonder gaze, but view the beauteous boy with more amaze. His rosy-colored cheeks, his radiant eyes, his motions, voice, and shape, and all the gods' disguise, nor pass unpraised the vest and veil divine, which wandering foliage and rich flowers entwine. But far above the rest the royal dame, already doomed to love's disastrous flame, with eyes insatiate and tumultuous joy, beholds the presence and admires the boy. The guileful god about the hero long, with children's play and false embraces hung. Then sought the queen, she took him to her arms, with greedy pleasure, and devoured his charms. Unhappy Dido little thought what guessed, how dire a god she drew so near her breast. But he, not mindless of his mother's prayer, works in the pliant bosom of the fair, and molds her heart anew, and blots her former care. The dead is to the living love resigned, and all Æneas enters in her mind. Now, when the rage of hunger was appeased, the meat removed and every guest was pleased, the golden bowls with sparkling wine are crowned, and through the palace cheerful cries resound. From gilded roofs the pending lamps display nocturnal beams that emulate the day. A golden bowl that shone with gems divine, the queen commanded to be crowned with wine. The bowl that Belus used on all the Tyrian line. Then silence to the horse proclaimed she spoke. O hospitable Jove, we thus invoke. With solemn rites, thy sacred name and power, bless to both nations this auspicious hour. So may the Trojan and the Tyrian line in lasting concord from this day combine. Thou, Bacchus, God of joys and friendly cheer, and gracious Juno both be present here. And you, my lords of Tyre, your vows address to heaven with mine to ratify the peace. The goblet then she took with nectar crowned, sprinkling the first libations on the ground, and raised it to her mouth with sober grace, then sipping offered to the next in place. 'Twas Bitias whom she called a thirsty soul, he took challenge and embraced the bowl. With pleasure swilled the gold, nor ceased to draw, till he the bottom of the brimmer saw. The goblet goes around, Iophas brought his golden lyre and sung what ancient Atlas taught. The various labors of the wandering moon, and whence proceed the eclipses of the sun. The original of men and beasts, and whence the rains arise and fires their warmth dispense. And fixed and erring stores dispose their influence. What shakes the solid earth, what causes delays, the summer nights and shortens winter days. With peals of shouts the Tyrians praise the song. Those peals are echoed by the Trojan throng. The unhappy queen with talk prolonged the night, and drank large draughts of love with vast delight. Of Priam much inquired, of Hector more, then asked what arms the swarthy Memnon wore, what troops he landed on the Trojan shore. The steeds of Diomed wearied the discourse, and fierce Achilles with his matchless force, at length as fate and her ill stores required, to hear the series of the war desired. Relate at large, my godlike guest, she said, the Grecian stratagems the towns betrayed, the fatal issue of so long a war. Your flights, your wanderings, and your wounds declare. For since on every sea, on every coast, your men have been distressed, your navy tossed, 7 times the sun has either tropic viewed, the winter banished, and the spring renewed.